Sometimes it seemed to Jon almost a living thing, with moods of its own. The colour of the ice was wont to change with every shift of light. Now it was the deep blue of frozen rivers, now the dirty white of old snow, and when clouds passed before the sun, it darkened to a pale grey of pitted stone. The wall stretched east to west as far as the eye could see, so huge that it shrunk the timbered keeps and stone towers of the castles to insignificance. It was the end of the world. The thoughts of Jon Snow on the wall. A Clash of Kings Chapter 6, Jon 1. When you first step into Westeros and the world that George R. R. Martin has created, one of the first elements that immediately jumps out at you is the sheer scale of it. And I'm not just talking about the landmass of Westeros itself, but the very geographical features and buildings that make it. One of the earliest indications we as readers get of this is when we see the wall for the first time. 300 miles long and 700 feet tall. In fact, the scale of Westeros is so large, even the TV adaptation Game of Thrones, with its huge budget by its latter seasons, was unable to portray the sheer enormity of some of the castles, with a lot of the castles in the show still being huge, but wholly more realistic than what George R. R. Martin had written. In fact, George has always been very open about the fact that he, in retrospect, may have made some elements of the world building way too big, and blames the fact he's not great with numbers for it. It's easy to write in a moment the existence of a 700-foot ice wall spanning a whole continent, or a castle effectively bigger than some small cities. But it's not until you actually take a step back and look at those numbers in context, you understand just how big everything in Westeros is. Some see this as a flaw in the world building, but personally for me it's part of the charm of Westeros, and these supersized castles and geography really help to give it character and make it what it is. In this video, we're going to be looking at 5 of the largest castles in Westeros, delving into their lore and why I think George created them the way he did. This isn't a top 5, and the castles are in no particular order, for a reason that will become clear very quickly. I want to start by talking about 2 castles that, while huge, have asterisks next to them for 2 very different reasons. The kind that could potentially put their inclusion on a list like this into question somewhat. The Hightower and the Eyrie. From where it stood atop the bluffs of Battle Isle, its shadow cut the city like a sword. The thoughts of Pate on the Hightower. A Feast for Crows prologue. The Hightower is the seat of, House Hightower, one of the most important families in the Reach. It's sort of a hybrid castle lighthouse, located in Oldtown atop Battle Isle, where the Honeywine widens into the Whispering Sound. The tower part of the complex is a massive stepped tower with a beacon on top to guide ships into port. It sits atop a labyrinth-like square fortress of unadorned black stone, which acts as the castle's foundations. Inside, it contains gloomy halls, vaults, and chambers, with most of the nicer living spaces within the Hightower itself. Spaces such as the High Hall and the apartments of Lord Hightower, which is located at the very top of the tower, just below the beacon. The Blackstone Fortress predates even Oldtown, with some speculation it could perhaps be Valyrian or potentially even older. House Hightower were at one stage First Men Kings during the dawn days of Westeros, while they dwelled in the chambers of this Blackstone Fortress. The family eventually built up a wooden beacon, rising some 50 feet above, to light the way for trading vessels in the foggy Whispering Sound. The first Hightower was then followed with several taller timber towers over time, but as Oldtown grew, so did the Hightower, with the wooden tower being replaced with the stone we see today. The Hightower is the tallest structure in the Seven Kingdoms, even higher than the 700-foot wall, with it potentially being the tallest tower in the known world. The people of Oldtown can tell the time of day by the tower's shadow, and some even claim that the wall can be seen from its top. Casterly Rock, however, is 3 times taller than the Hightower or the wall. We don't really know exactly how tall the Hightower is, but given that Casterly Rock is described as 3 times taller than both the wall and the high tower, it might indicate that while the high tower is taller than 700 feet, it might not be that much taller to make it worth separating in the comparison to Casterly Rock. To kind of put it into perspective, the Shard in London is about 1,000 feet tall, as is the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Given the high tower is just under the height of these, really gets across the sheer height of the structure, especially given the medieval setting of Westeros, with some all-important fantasy twists that make buildings such as this possible. Where I live, we have this tower called the Spinnaker Tower, that's only about 550 feet, but no matter where you are in the city, the tower is looming over it. It's no wonder people claim they could see the wall from the high tower, even as a joke. I think what makes the high tower seem even more impressive and imposing is the fact there are no other structures next to it, or even close to being as tall, anywhere near it. The fact it sits alone in the skyline really helps get across the sheer size of the tower. So just to get an idea of the scale of the high tower, here's a picture of the skyline of the city where I live, with the 500-foot tower. Next to it is roughly how big the high tower would be in comparison. If we say it's a bit taller than the wall, call it 800 feet. Now, considering a lot of the buildings in Old Town would be a lot smaller and lower, with a few bigger places like the Citadel, it really would loom over the entire city. Now, the reason this one has an asterisk is because there is some debate as to if the tower itself counts as a castle, especially given that it was built on top of a pre-existing keep. It's definitely something to keep in mind when we talk about some of the other true castles later. 7 towers, Ned had told her, like white daggers thrust into the belly of the sky, so high you can stand on the parapets and look down onto the clouds. The thoughts of Catelyn Stark about the Eyrie, A Game of Thrones chapter 34, Catelyn 6. Now my next questionable inclusion on this list is the Eyrie, the ancient seat of House Arryn situated in the Mountains of the Moon, on the shoulder of its peak, known as the Giant's Lance, several thousand feet above the valleys below. Although the castle itself is small in comparison to the other great seats of Westeros, about the size of Maegor's Holdfast, which is only really a part of the Red Keep, the Eyrie is considered impregnable to attack due to its location and the path needed to reach the castle itself. During winter time, the Arryns will seek refuge against the cold in the Gates of the Moon at the base of the mountains. The castle was made of fine white stone, with its 7 slim white towers bunched tightly together, being able to hold up to 500 men. By comparison, the Great Hall at Winterfell alone could hold that many. The Eyrie lacks stables, smithies and kennels, things you would normally expect in a seat like this. But given its location, this is not surprising. But it does have a granary as large as those found in much larger castles, such as Winterfell. The Eyrie also contains other structures, such as a sept, a high hall, which contains House Arryn's weirwood throne, and the moon door that opens up into the valley floor below. It also has a host of other rooms in each of the 7 towers, as well as a godswood and the feared sky cells, prison cells that open into the valley below. It's hard to get a clear idea just how big the Eyrie really is. We know the actual size of the castle itself is no bigger than Maegor's Holdfast. The issue is we don't really know for sure how big the Holdfast is. The Red Keep itself is about 525 feet tall, but Maegor's Holdfast is a castle within the castle, so it would most likely be much less than that 525 feet. Looking at official art, it almost seems about half the size, which would make the Eyrie about 260 feet tall if it was stationed on the ground. But that's the point. The Eyrie in itself is not that large. What makes it seem so huge is its location on top of the Giant's Lance. In A Game of Thrones, Catelyn 6, the following is stated in regard to the Eyrie. Looming over them all was the jagged peak called the Giant's Lance, a mountain that even mountains looked up to, its head lost in the icy mist, 3.5 miles above the valley floor. That works out at roughly about 18,500 feet tall. As a real-world comparison, that's about the same size as the tallest mountains in the Alps. Now, some will argue that it being built 18,500 feet off the valley floor as not being part of the height of the castle itself, while others will say that the height of the mountain should be considered given it's what makes the castle so defendable. It's an intentional design choice. Either way you look at it, The castle is a marvel and stands out among all the others in Westeros, but the reason we are putting an asterisk on its inclusion on the list is because you can make a fair argument for it, both being a few hundred feet high or 3.5 miles high. He remembered Winterfell as he had last seen it, not as grotesquely huge as Harrenhal, nor as solid and as impregnable to look at as Storm's End. Yet there had been great strength in those stones, a sense that within those walls a man might feel safe. The news of the castle's fall had come as a retching shock. Tyrion Lannister's thoughts about Winterfell, A Clash of Kings chapter 54, Tyrion 12. Winterfell might seem like a really obvious inclusion on this list of largest castles in Westeros, but it might not be for the reason you think. It's not here because of its height, but the sheer footprint of the castle itself, especially when you consider how old it is. Winterfell, in reality, is a huge castle complex spanning several acres and encircled by 2 massive walls. It's all been built around an ancient godswood and over a natural hot spring. The waters of the hot spring are piped through the walls and into the chambers within the castle to heat them, making Winterfell more comfortable than any other castle during the harsh northern winters. Inside the walls, the complex is composed of dozens of courtyards and small open spaces. The inner ward is a second, much older open space in the castle, where archery practice tends to take place. It's located next to the Broken Tower. Inside Winterfell stands the inner castle, which contains the Great Keep and the Great Hall, with the Great Keep being the innermost stronghold of the complex. It was built over the natural hot springs which keeps it warm. It contains the bedchambers for House Stark, as well as the solar of the Lord of Winterfell. The building is connected to the armory and other structures within the castle by covered bridges, meaning you don't have to go down to the bottom level and outside to go from building to building. From the window-covered bridges, you can see the entire castle yard. The Great Hall itself is used obviously for receiving guests and is the place where the household would gather to dine. It opens into the castle yard and has a rear exit that leads into a dimly lit gallery. The hall itself can host around 500 people, which is about half as many as you could fit in the Red Keep's Great Hall. The hall contains the high seat of the old kings of the north, and is where the Lord of Winterfell will often hold court. Other key locations include the ancient and deep crypts of House Stark, and of course, the ancient godswood the whole complex is built around. It has stood untouched for 10,000 years, with 3 acres of old packed earth and close together trees, creating a dense canopy. At the centre of the grove stands an ancient weirwood tree with a face carved into it, standing near a black pool of water. The godswood is enclosed by its own wall within the castle, keeping it separate from the main complex. Now for me, one of the more defining traits of Winterfell is its dual castle walls. It has a smaller outer wall at 80 feet tall, and an inner one at 100 feet, separated by dry moats in between. When you compare just how tall these castle walls are compared to real-life castles, it dwarfs them by almost double. Now, we don't exactly know how tall the main structure of Winterfell is, but some fans have made estimations that have put it around 160 feet tall, which, while much smaller than the Red Keep or the Drum Tower of Storm's End, it isn't what makes Winterfell large. Rather, it's the complex as a whole. Again, we don't know how big it is exactly, but what we do know is that the godswood alone is 3 acres, which is about 130,000 square feet. The godswood alone seems to take up about a quarter of Winterfell's floor space, so you can kind of get an idea just how large this complex is. To put it into a real-world perspective, the pitch at Wembley Stadium, the home of the England football team, is about 77,000 square feet. So the godswood at Winterfell alone is about 1.8 the size of that pitch. While this map I have here is fan-made, it does give us an idea of the sheer size of Winterfell when using the pitch for scale. While as a whole, Winterfell is larger than, say, the Red Keep, some fan speculation making it around 3 times larger. The Red Keep as a structure is much bigger, however, fitting into a much smaller footprint than Winterfell. The double walls and the sheer size of the structure is what makes Winterfell so defendable. The issue is finding enough men to defend it to its fullest capabilities. But the idea, especially with the concept of Winterfell's Winter Town, is that in winter, and maybe in a war, other lords and houses would rally to Winterfell to make a defence, thus making better use of its defensive capabilities. All I'm saying is with its hot springs and greenhouse is not a bad place to gather during, say, a long night. Lord Tywin looms as large as Casterly Rock, and no king has ever had such a diligent or capable hand. The writings of Grand Maester Pycelle, the world of ice and fire, the Targaryen kings, Aerys II. Casterly Rock is huge. Ridiculously huge. It's the seat of House Lannister and the capital of the Westerlands. It lies on the Ocean Road and overlooks the large city of Lannisport and the Sunset Sea. Casterly Rock itself is carved out of a colossal stone hill beside the sea. According to George R. R. Martin, the rock is about 6 miles long from east to west, with a width of about 2 miles from north to south, which would make its footprint about half the size of Winterfell's Godswood. But the footprint can be deceptive. There are countless miles of tunnels and chambers within the rock itself, which used to be mine shafts. While the footprint is impressive, its height is more so. The rock's peak is about 2,100 feet high, which makes it 3 times as high as the highest point of the wall, and taller than the Hightower in Oldtown too. The Casterlys of old built a ring fort on the peak, and as millennia have passed, the natural defences the rock provided have been expanded with walls, gates and watchtowers. The base of the rock contains a large sea-carved caverns, allowing access from the ocean. The stone of the rock has been mined for thousands of years, so there are hundreds of mine shafts in the depths of the rock, as well as yet untouched gold veins. The face of the rock has windows and arrow slits scattered all over. They look small from the outside, but this is only an illusion due to the rock's huge size. The entire stronghold, tunnels, dungeons, storerooms, barracks, halls, grand halls, stables, stairways, courtyards, balconies, gardens, a sept, passages, caves, mines, galleries, chutes, wells, barracks, armories, bedchambers, servants' quarters, and so much more lie within inside the rock itself, the only exception being the watchtower on the top of the mount that is used as the Maester's rookery. According to George R. R. Martin, this practically makes Casterly Rock the strongest and most impregnable seat in all of Westeros. So there is no doubt that Casterly Rock is huge. But like, say, the Eyrie, is it really fair to call the natural formation a part of the castle, especially when it comes to the claims of its height? While the rock itself is 2,100 feet tall, the castle that sits on its peak is not even close to that, and from what we know, seems more akin to the other great seats of Westeros in size, without the height of the rock itself. The reason I'm more inclined to include it on this list than, say, the Eyrie is due to the way the Casterlys and later Lannisters have used the tunnels and chambers inside the rock, from mining the gold, to expand the interior space of the castle. Yes, it's been carved out of the rock, but I would argue that in itself is just as challenging as raising a standalone castle itself. To put it into a real-world perspective, let's compare Casterly Rock to its real-world inspiration, the Rock of Gibraltar, which is about 1,400 feet tall, with it being about 3 miles long and 3/4 of a mile wide. So in terms of length, it's on par with Casterly Rock, but the rock is about double the width and about 700 feet taller. So it's really this monolithic thing, and you can understand why it's seen as an impregnable fortress. The night fires had burned low, and as the east began to lighten, the immense mass of Storm's End emerged like a dream of stone wisps of pale mist raced across the light of the field, flying from the sun on the wings of wind. Thoughts of Catelyn Stark, A Clash of Kings, Chapter 33, Catelyn 4. Storm's End is one of the most visually distinct castles in Westeros. Currently the seat of House Baratheon, Lords Paramount of the Stormlands, the castle is located at Durin's Point on the northern coast of Shipbreakers Bay, with the King's Road running north from Storm's End through the Stormlands to King's Landing. It's one of the strongest castles in the realm, and was once the ancestral seat of the Storm Kings of House Durrandon, extending back many thousands of years. The castle is said to be protected by spells woven into its very walls that prevent magic from affecting it or passing through it. Storm's End is surrounded by a massive outer curtain wall, 100 feet high, which is the same height as Winterfell's highest wall. But it's not the height of the wall that is impressive. The wall is 40 feet thick on its thinnest side, and nearly 80 feet thick on the seaward side. The wall in some places is so thick it's bigger than your average modest castle. The wall is smooth and curving, the stones so well placed and so perfectly fit together that the wind can find no purchase. On the seaward side, there is 150-foot drop below into the sea. Storm's End only has one tower, a colossal drum tower crowned with formidable battlements, making it look like a huge spiked fist thrusting towards the sky. The tower is so large that it comfortably contains the granary, barracks, armoury, feast hall, and the Lord's chambers all at once. We don't know for sure how tall the drum tower is, but it does seem larger than the curtain wall, which is 100 feet tall, which would put the drum tower at least on par with the other great seats of Westeros in terms of its height. The sheer thickness and height of its walls makes Storm's End very hard to attack, even with siege engines. Thus, why most sieges of the castle end up being a long and drawn-out waiting game. Now, before we get into the obvious undisputed king of the castles of Westeros, I do just want to give a few honourable mentions. Father said the Red Keep was smaller than Winterfell, but in her dreams it had been immense. An endless stone maze, with that seemed to shift and change behind her. The thoughts of Arya Stark. A Game of Thrones chapter 32, Arya 3. First is the Red Keep. There is no doubt that the Red Keep is a huge castle. It's just really hard to quantify how large it is, given we have very few data points to work from. But there are some things to consider. We know that the walls of Maegor's Holdfast within the castle are about 12 feet thick, which is quite large, especially when considering that it's not even the main building. We can also tell from the point of view chapters of characters who lived in the Red Keep that the towers of the castle, such as the Tower of the Hand and the White Sword Tower, are taller than Maegor's Holdfast. I've seen some estimations suggesting the Red Keep is about 500 feet tall, but I'm not sure how they've gotten to that number. But given how it's been described, a figure such as this would not surprise me. You also get the impression from the Stark point of views in King's Landing that Winterfell itself is definitely larger in terms of its footprint. The Red Keep seems to have a lot more physical buildings within its more compact space. Much like Casterly Rock, we also have many tunnels that run through Aegon's High Hill. Again, we don't know how tall Aegon's Hill is, but what it does do is, much like the Giant's Lance with the Eyrie, is add a lot of height to the Red Keep if we are looking at it from street level. It would be this ominous monolithic structure looming over the whole of King's Landing. Dragonstone is also a tricky one. It's certainly a large castle, likely on par with what you would expect from the other great seats of Westeros. Again, the issue is, we don't have any quantifiable figures to really say how big it is. Given the fact it's a Valyrian stronghold, even before it came into the possession of House Targaryen, suggests it is more than just your average castle or keep, especially when you consider how it was constructed with liquefied, reshaped stone. But what does give me pause for thought about just how big it really is the fact that in a few places in the books, such as the Aklasha King's prologue chapter, Dragonstone is described as a small fortress. But the issue we have is we have no context on what kind of other castles it's being compared to be considered small. For example, everything seems small when compared to Winterfell or Casterly Rock, hence why I hedge my bets that it's on par with some of the smaller end of the great seats of Westeros, the likes of Storm's End or the main castle of the Eyrie. We must also consider that, like a lot of these larger castles, Dragonstone is not built on ground level, but on the side of an active volcano, which again is going to add height and a lot of scale to it. Given that we know that Dragonstone as an island has a very small folk population, and only a small port that can't even really host a fleet, brings into question the idea of there even being a need for a huge castle on the island. Hence why it in fact might be described as a small fortress. Sunspear also deserves a mention as well. It's not that large of a castle, but still respectable as a great seat of power. It does of course have a 150-foot tall, aforementioned Spear Tower, which is used as a prison for noble captives. You could argue that the Shadow City should also be included as part of Sunspear, given that it has a wall of its own that encircles both the Shadow City and the castle itself. But the issue is, if you do that, you would also have to count the whole of King's Landing as part of the Red Keep, given the same logic applies. And finally, Highgarden, the seat of House Tyrell. We know it's big, located on the broad verdant hills overlooking the Mander. The castle is surrounded by 3 rings of white stone, whose crenulated curtain walls increase in height the closer you get to the castle. Between the outer and middle walls is a famous labyrinth, which serves to entertain as well as slow invaders. The oldest tower, squat and square, dates in the Age of Heroes. Newer towers are taller and slender, with rounded fortifications dating from after the coming of the Andals. Given Highgarden is filled with flowers, singers, pipers, fiddlers and harpers, the stables also have a fine selection of horses, and there are pleasure boats to sail along the Mander. Highgarden is certainly huge, given just how much space you would need to allow for elements such as a triple curtain wall and the labyrinth, let alone the huge gardens. Just in text, we have no tangible number or scale to really play with. The castle has an ill repute, and one that's well deserved. It's said that Harren and his sons still walk the halls by night, afire. Those who look upon them burst into flames. I fear no shade, sir. It is written in the 7-pointed star that spirits, wights, and revenants cannot harm a pious man as long as he is armoured in his faith. Then armour yourself in faith, by all means, but wear a suit of mail and plate as well. Every man who holds this castle seems to come to a bad end. The mountain, the goat, even my father. Jaime Lannister and Bonifer Hasty, on Harrenhal. A Feast for Crows, Chapter 27, Jaime 3. Harrenhal is by far the king of the castles in the Seven Kingdoms. Currently is the seat of House Went, but ever since it was burned by Aegon during the conquest and the downfall of House Hoare, it's allegedly been cursed, with one house never holding on to the castle for long before disaster strikes. It's located in the Riverlands on the north shore of the God's Eye, built by King Harrenhal, king of the Isles and Rivers, the feared Ironborn ruler whose pet project it was. It took decades to build, cost an unfathomable amount of gold, and cost countless human lives in the form of the workers, often forced to work on the mega project. The castle has 5 towers of enormous size, with an equally monstrous curtain wall. The walls are incredibly thick, and its rooms are built on a scale that would be more comfortable for the likes of giants and humans. Harrenhal possesses the largest single chamber in all of the Seven Kingdoms, known as the Hall of 100 Hearths. It's even larger than the throne room in the Red Keep. King Jaehaerys, the Conciliator, chose Harrenhal as the location of the Great Council of 101 AC because he did not know how many would attend and wanted space for at least 500 lords and their enormous entourages. More than 1,000 lords came, not including the camp followers, merchants, and other small folk who gathered at Harrenhal to trade and sell their wares. The castle covers 3 times as much ground as Winterfell, and its buildings are so much larger they can scarcely be comprehended. The stables, for example, can hold 1,000 horses. Its godswood covers 20 acres compared to Winterfell's 3, and its kitchens alone are as large as Winterfell's Great Hall. If we bring back our map of Winterfell, overlaid on the real-world map of Wembley Stadium, you can see just how large Harrenhal is in comparison. When the Great Council of 101 happened, it's said that for a few weeks Harrenhal became the 3rd largest city in Westeros. That's how many people Harrenhal and the surrounding area managed to hold. When you see the scale of it, you can start to understand why that's the case. Harrenhal's gatehouse is as large as Winterfell's Great Keep, which, when we think about it, is 150 feet tall. From the outside, only the tops of the 5 immense towers can be seen, given the height of the wall obscures them from view. Of the 5 towers, the shortest is half again as high as the tallest one in Winterfell, which would make the shortest tower around 225-ish feet. Some fans have estimated that given that the tallest of the 5 towers, the Kingspire Tower, is likely somewhere between 5 and 650 feet, given that we know that the Hightower is the tallest tower in Westeros at 800 feet, and that Harrenhal is not compared to the wall at 700 foot, which might point towards it not being as tall as the wall. Here's the crazy thing about the towers at Harrenhal. What we see today is not even the towers at their full extent. After being burned by Aegon and Balerion the Blackdread during the conquest, they are now bent, lumped and cracked from the melting of the stone. So at the very least, the other 4 towers could be closer in size originally to the Kingspire Tower. Kingspire Tower itself perhaps being even taller than it is today, maybe somewhere closer to the height of the Hightower.